Spain's silence just ended, and when Luis de la Fuente finally opened his mouth about what Argentina did after that final whistle, he didn't hold anything back. For days, this has been the strangest imbalance in the entire story. Argentina's players posting emotional tributes on social media, pundits like Gary Neville and Alan Shearer calling the scenes disgraceful, FIFA appointing a prosecutor, the UK government weighing in over an unrelated banner controversy, and through all of it, the one group of people who were actually on the receiving end of Leandro Paredes grabbing throats and throwing teenagers to the ground, Spain's own players and coaching staff, had said almost nothing until now. Speaking to Spanish public broadcaster TVE, De La Fuente was asked directly about the post-match chaos, and what came out was about as blunt as it gets from a World Cup winning head coach. He admitted up front that he hadn't actually witnessed the brawl unfold in real time. He was celebrating with his own players and staff, hugging teammates, lost in the moment of winning the biggest trophy in the sport. But once he saw what had actually happened, his tone shifted completely. In his own words, "It is intolerable, unacceptable, it cannot be allowed." That admission is worth sitting with for a second because it actually explains a lot about why Spain's reaction has taken this long to arrive. If the head coach himself didn't process what happened until after the trophy lift, after the initial wave of celebration, after he'd had time to actually sit down and watch the footage back, it makes sense that his players followed a similar pattern. Rodri's own account, given right after the final, was calm and measured, describing pulling himself away from trouble rather than condemning anyone outright. It's only now, days later, with the adrenaline gone and the footage fully digested, that the real verdict from inside the Spanish camp has actually landed. That's not a throwaway line. That's a World Cup winning manager, less than 72 hours after lifting the trophy, choosing 3 separate ways to say the exact same thing. Back to back to back, just to make sure nobody could mistake what he meant. He didn't stop there either. De La Fuente went further, making a point of highlighting how his own players responded in the middle of that same chaos, under provocation, under what he clearly views as an act of aggression directed at them, in the biggest moment of their careers. His message was simple: our players kept their composure and behaved like true professionals. Think about what that framing does. He's not just condemning Argentina's conduct, he's holding his own team up as the contrast, the disciplined, composed side that had every reason to react and chose not to, standing next to a team that, in his telling, did the opposite in the biggest game of the entire tournament. That's a much sharper piece of positioning than simply saying that shouldn't have happened. It's Spain quietly building the narrative of who behaved like champions and who didn't, using their own conduct as the evidence. It's a smart piece of framing on another level too, because it sidesteps the trap plenty of managers fall into after incidents like this, coming across as bitter or vindictive towards beaten opponents. De La Fuente never once suggests Argentina are bad people, or a badly run team, or unworthy of the respect he'd shown them all tournament. If anything, he goes out of his way to reaffirm that respect twice in the same breath as his criticism. That's a deliberate needle to thread. Condemn the conduct without torching the relationship. Hold your rivals accountable without sounding like you're gloating over a beaten opponent while you're still holding the trophy. Now, to understand why this moment carries so much weight, you have to go back to what actually happened on the pitch that De La Fuente is describing. The final whistle went. Spain had just won 1-0 in extra time, courtesy of a dramatic late goal from Ferran Torres. And as Spain's bench emptied to celebrate, Argentina's Nahuel Molina appeared to strike Spain captain Rodri in the stomach as players ran past him. That set off the chain reaction that followed. Eric Garcia getting pulled into it, then Paredes grabbing Garcia by the throat before turning on Gavi and throwing him to the ground by his substitute's bib, with several Spain players having to physically pull Paredes away. It's also worth remembering just how unusual this final already was before any of that happened. Argentina played the last stretch of normal time with 10 men, after Enzo Fernandez was shown a second yellow card for a challenge on Pau Cubarsí, making him the first player sent off in a World Cup final in 16 years, since the Netherlands' John Heitinga back in the 2010 final. That's the same final, by the way, that Spain won for the first time, meaning this new title, their second, arrived almost exactly the way their first one did. A tight, tense final settled by a single moment of quality, this time from Ferran Torres instead of Andrés Iniesta. And that title is genuinely remarkable on its own terms, brawl completely aside, which is part of why De La Fuente's comments land as more than just the manager venting. Spain conceded just one single goal across their entire 8-game run to the trophy, the fewest goals conceded by any World Cup winning side in the tournament's history. This wasn't a team that scraped through on luck. This was, statistically, the most defensively dominant championship run ever put together at a World Cup. De La Fuente built a genuinely historic side, and the eventual defining image of that side's tournament almost became a brawl that had nothing to do with any of it. That's clearly part of what's driving the tone of his comments. When you've just delivered the most statistically dominant World Cup win in the competition's history, and the story instantly gets hijacked by a fistfight after the final whistle, there's a real incentive to step in and redirect the narrative back toward what actually happened on the pitch, and toward how your own players behaved when given every reason not to. It's also worth putting his comments in the context of everything else swirling around this story right now. FIFA has appointed a disciplinary and ethics prosecutor to investigate the brawl, but as of right now, there's no confirmed timeline for when that investigation wraps, and it's genuinely unclear when any eventual ban would even apply, because Argentina don't have another competitive fixture scheduled for months. Adding to the confusion, the red card Paredes appeared to receive live on broadcast never actually made it into the official match record. FIFA later confirmed it had been removed, meaning that on paper, nobody has been sent off at all for any of this. So while FIFA's process grinds along slowly and quietly behind the scenes, with no punishment confirmed for Paredes, Molina, or anyone else involved, De La Fuente has just become the single most prominent voice from inside either camp to go on the record and call the whole thing out directly in plain, repeated language, with his own country's biggest broadcaster carrying every word. That's a meaningful contrast worth sitting with. FIFA's institutional response has been slow, technical, and largely bureaucratic. Prosecutors appointed, reports pending, cards vanishing from paperwork. De La Fuente's response was the opposite of all that. No hedging, no waiting for a formal process to conclude, no careful diplomatic language designed to avoid controversy. Just a direct, repeated, on-the-record condemnation from the man who watched his own captain get struck and his own young players manhandled. In a story that's mostly been defined by institutions moving cautiously, his comments stand out precisely because they didn't wait for anyone's permission. That timing matters. Up to this point, the loudest condemnation of Argentina's conduct had come entirely from outside voices, British pundits, former referees, newspaper columnists. Now you've got the actual World Cup winning head coach, the man whose own captain was struck and whose own young players were manhandled, putting his name directly behind the word unacceptable. That's a very different kind of pressure than a pundit's punditry. It's the testimony of somebody who was there, whose team was the one targeted, saying on the record that this crossed a real line. There's a broader angle here too, about how quickly the tone of this story has shifted since the final whistle. In the immediate aftermath, there were actually moments of real grace on that same pitch. Several Spain players were seen embracing Argentina's Lionel Messi once the chaos settled down, and Spain's players formed a guard of honor for Argentina as they collected their runner-up medals, applauding their fallen opponents even after being on the wrong end of a brawl minutes earlier. Notably, Argentina's players did not return that gesture when Spain collected their own medals, a small detail at the time, but one that looks a little different in hindsight, now that De La Fuente has gone on record about how his players actually felt watching those same replays back. That's the image FIFA and plenty of neutral fans probably wanted to be the lasting one. Grace in defeat, respect between two great teams, a guard of honor healing whatever tension existed in the immediate aftermath of the brawl. De La Fuente's comments this week complicate that picture. He's not undoing the guard of honor or the Messi embrace, but he is making clear that grace in the moment doesn't mean the conduct gets a pass once the emotion settles and people actually watch the footage back. So here's where this actually leaves the story. Argentina still haven't faced a single confirmed sanction. FIFA's investigation is still open with no timetable. The Falklands banner situation from the semifinal is still unresolved too. But the silence from Spain's own camp, the one gap in this entire saga that had genuinely stood out for days, just closed. And it closed about as directly as it possibly could have. Intolerable, unacceptable, cannot be allowed. 3 different ways of saying the same thing from the one man whose team actually lived through it. Whether FIFA's eventual ruling matches the seriousness of that language remains to be seen. There's an interesting question here about what happens next too, whether De La Fuente's comments end up being treated as a genuinely notable data point in FIFA's ongoing investigation, given that they're an on-record account from the winning manager describing the incident as a clear act of aggression and provocation, or whether they simply exist as a public statement with no formal weight in the disciplinary process at all. FIFA's prosecutor doesn't need a manager's press comments to build a case. The video evidence already speaks for itself. But public statements like this one do tend to add pressure, the same way the UK government's comments over the banner controversy added pressure earlier in the week. Institutions don't like being seen as slower to act than the people directly affected by the incident they're supposed to be investigating. There's also something worth noting about how this fits into the broader shape of Argentina's tournament as a whole. Between the Falklands banner row, Enzo Fernandez's rare red card, the post-final brawl, the vanishing card, and now the head coach of the team they just lost to publicly calling their conduct intolerable, Argentina's build-up to defending their title has been overshadowed almost entirely by conduct stories rather than football ones. Spain, by contrast, gets to walk away with a genuinely historic defensive record, a dramatic extra-time winner, and now a manager who's made sure the final word on his own team's conduct is on the record for anyone comparing the two sides. And De La Fuente's comments aren't landing in isolation either. This is the same week La Liga president Javier Tebas went after FIFA president Gianni Infantino directly, calling the entire disciplinary system arbitrary and saying Infantino's time in charge should be over. Different target, different specific grievance, but the same underlying theme running through both. A sense among some of the most powerful figures in European football that this tournament's governance and conduct standards fell short, and that saying so quietly isn't good enough anymore. De La Fuente isn't attacking FIFA the way Tebas is. His target is Argentina's conduct specifically, not the institution investigating it. But taken together, it's been a rough week for anyone hoping this World Cup would be remembered purely for the football. But at the very least, nobody can say anymore that Spain stayed quiet about what happened to them.